Захисникам України, героям нашим тричі! Слава! 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 Glory to Ukrainian defenders! Glory! 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 Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're going to start today's rally. We managed to start actually pretty much on time that we planned, 1:15. We're going to start with national anthem. So please stand around, come close. Захисникам України тричі! Слава! 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 Thank you, my friends, for joining in tonight. Since the Russia atrocity over Ukraine, since the war started, we all here a big family. The family united with one agenda, with one goal, to deliver the truth about all the war crimes that Russia committing, to tell the world to continue to support Ukraine, to remind the world that the war is not over, that the Russian crimes should not and will not be going away unpunished. We're here to stand with Ukraine and for Ukraine. This rally going on 3 times a week. We're here every Wednesday. For those who join us, we're here every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. Wednesday 6 to 8, Friday 6 to 8 p.m. and Sunday we're here 3 to 5 p.m. 3 times a week, every week, to remind the world about the war in Ukraine is not over. Stop Russia, stop the war!
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 Russia is a terrorist state!
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 The war didn't start last night. It's been going on for more than 3,500 days since the Russia annexed the east of Ukraine and the Crimea. The war has been going on for nearly 10 years. 10 years of the brutality, murder, killing, the Russian atrocity on Ukraine. 10 years the Russia been land grabbing, Russia been terrorizing Ukrainian citizens, Russia has been terrorizing and bombing Ukrainian towns, cities and villages and killing Ukrainians. 10 years. It's been now, we are approaching 2 years now since Russia decided and launched a full-scale war on Ukraine. Reminding everyone, February 24, 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale war on Ukraine with one aim, to destroy Ukraine as a nation, to destroy and kill Ukrainian citizens, and to turn Ukraine into the gray zone that will be the zone between the West and the terrorist Russia. It did not happen overnight. Those attacks were well planned. The attacks were planned for a long time. To understand why the Russia launched this war, you cannot describe it. It didn't happen overnight. It's been long, systematical, planned attacks, step by step, over Ukraine. It didn't happen overnight. Russia didn't become the terrorist state overnight. It's a combination of the factors that leads towards this full-scale invasion. The Russia committing and committed many crimes. And to understand why this is happening, there are many factors. One of them is there is no democracy there. It's a totalitarian regime run by few who only aim for the total power and terrorizing these neighbors, terrorizing the countries, and sharing the propaganda. They're using other countries, other people weaknesses towards their imperialistic expansion. It did not happen overnight. The Russia became the terrorist state over the long period of time. But they crossed all the possible lines on the February 24, 2022. The 2 decades in power of Day Putler, that was one of the reasons why they became who they became. It became the terrorist state, run by the terrorist organization called the Russian so-called regime. They launched the attack on the peaceful Ukrainian nation that only was looking forward for the future, and they were expanding democratic values, and they were looking forward towards joining the big European family, towards the joining NATO. This is opposite to what the Russia wanted. This is absolutely opposite, and it was going against the Russian plans. That's why there was one reason why they launched the attack on the February 24, 2022. Because they expected no resistance, they expected no consequences for their actions, and they expected that the world will stay silent and do absolutely what they did before. Deep sympathy, concerns, and no actions. And because of inaction for the previous expansions of the terrorist Russian regime, for their imperialistic ambitions, that lead into the full-scale war, which we have it now today in Europe. We have it in Ukraine. So the other people, governments, or individuals or groups in action led towards what we have now today, which we have the full-scale war launched by the terrorist Russian regime over Ukraine. Started 10 years ago, going back into history from the systematical discrimination of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian citizens, Ukrainian nationalists, and it's brought into the full-scale war we have it today. Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Stop Russia! Russia, stop the war!
Stop 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 Russia, stop the war!
Russia is a terrorist state!
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 Because very little action or support or help, the Russia continue committing the crimes, continue launching more and more attacks. Few days ago, they launched in one night more than 80 aviation attacks. They launched 80 attacks in one day. They launched 14 rockets. They launched more than 21 Shahed. They launched nearly 80 drones on the Ukraine. The killer drones that only aim is to destroy. There was no break from the Russian attack over the last 2 years. There was not a single day when the Russia stopped fighting. There was not a single day when they stopped launching the rockets, shell, drones, or mortar onto Ukrainians, onto Ukraine. They talks about possible peace. It's nothing but just a hollow echo, the hollow sound that's not backed by any logic or any ground. And they had no intention to stop, and they don't, and they will not stop. And only for them to stop is for us to unite our effort, for us to unite our powers, for us to unite all the forces against this terrorist threat, against this cancer that comes from the Russia, from the east. We have to unite our forces, because only when we united, we can fight and win this war. They have no plans to stop, and they have no plans to end this war. They're looking and preparing for the long war. And only us, with our friends and partners, we have to combine the efforts and force them to withdraw and stop the fighting. But we must act together, and we must act united as one big family. The family that united on the ground of democracy, future, and light of truth and freedom. The freedom against the tyranny, the freedom against the terrorism, the freedom against the imperialistic propaganda that Russia is constantly threatening not just the Ukraine, but the entire world. The world, the Europe, and Ukraine in particular. Only in unity we're able to withstand against this threat. So we must continue our fight, we must continue our support, and we will continue against this terrorist, against this threat that we call the Russia. The Russian terrorist regime will have to fall if we want to see the brighter future, and if you want to see stop Russia, stop the war.
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 The US ambassador to NATO, the former US representative to Ukraine, Kurt Walker, he said that he convinced that today's NATO policy inadvertently sent a signal to the Putin to continue hostilities, because when they say that Ukraine will become the member in the long term, and Ukraine cannot become the NATO state because of the war. This sends the clear message to Putin to continue to fight and continue to destroy Ukraine. This is an incentive for the Putin to continue this war. I really think it is time for us to send the exact opposite message, that Ukraine will become the member of the NATO as soon as possible. And this means that there will be no way for Ukraine to lose. Then it will be pointless for Putin to continue this war and it will be destructive for Russia. This was said by the Walker on the European Parliament conference. And I kind of agree what he's saying, because if the world and the government sending wrong message, this message is picked up by the terrorist Russian regime, and they will fight in Ukraine for longer. And that's what they're aiming for. Ukraine must get support today. Ukraine must receive the strong messages that will be echoed in the terrorist Russia about Ukraine is on the path, and Ukraine will become the European member, and Ukraine will become the NATO member stuff. The Ukraine will be the part of the Western family, and there will be the strong enough message for Putin to stop this war. To stop this war now. Because he's expecting for this war to go on forever. Because of hesitation, because there is no clear signal and there is no clear message. So by helping Ukraine today, and not to making the blue promises down the line, by helping Ukraine today, there will be the strong enough message for Russian terrorist army, for the terrorist regime to withdraw and to stop this fight. But the message must be clear, and the message must be continuous and across all organizations, and directed to the terrorist Russian regime, stating that we are back in Ukraine. We back in Ukraine not just by sounding the hollow noises, but by physically helping, supporting Ukraine and welcoming Ukraine into the European Union and into the NATO family. This will be a strong message to Putin to stop this war. And that will bring us to the victory a day sooner. Help Ukraine now!
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 Help Ukraine protect peace!
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 Stop Russia! Stop the war!
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 We must not forget that Ukraine is giving up its brightest and most bravest citizen, the true patriots, the true citizen of Ukraine. There are many Ukrainian citizens from different ethnic groups that were happily living in Ukraine before the Russian full invasion. On the ground of ethnicity, there was another point when Russia launched a full-scale war in Ukraine. But now, against this terrorist regime, we have Ukrainian citizens from many backgrounds, from many ethnic groups. They call themselves Ukrainians, who are fighting against one common enemy. The enemy that called the terrorist Russian regime and its army and its government. But we united against this threat. and we will continue this fight until Ukraine's victory. If Russia is ready to send and kill thousands every day of their own men, Ukraine cannot afford this. Ukraine is giving up its brightest as opposed to the Russia who sent its wars, who sent the people for the money, for the crimes they committed, by pardoning them, by amnesting them. Ukraine on the opposite end is losing its brightest. So the price for Ukraine that Ukraine is paying is very difficult, is very high. If Russia willing to fight for years and lose thousands every day, it's up to them. But we must combine and continue to support Ukraine with what Ukraine is needed, with what Ukraine is asking, to be able to bring this victory a day sooner. Stand with Ukraine!
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 Russia is a terrorist state!
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 According to Ukrainian sources, the Russia has lost last night alone more than 1,100 by seriously injured or is dead. They lost more than 27 armored vehicles. They lost the artillery systems. They lost many launch systems, and they continue to lose it every day. And I don't mind, I don't care how many they lose, as long as we committed and we stay strong behind Ukraine, we will definitely win. We will definitely win this war. Just to remind, we had it now, we're literally a few days away from another winter. The war started in February 2022, and we headed towards another winter. And we must not forget what the last winter was for Ukraine, when the people stood without lights, without gas and electricity, because Russia targeted critical infrastructure. The Russia targeted power plants, refineries, power stations, railway tracks, lines, gas, oil. They were targeting the infrastructure and left many towns, cities and villages without basics, without the power, electricity, without the hot water. We heading towards another winter. Ukraine this time is stronger. But the Seoul and Russia, they are strong. The sanctions they received are working, but they constantly avoided the sanctions because sanctions are not powerful enough, not strong enough, not effective enough to stop Russia from fighting. And they preparing for this winter. We have no illusion that this winter will be not easier than previous one. And Russia is going to target more and more Ukrainian infrastructure. And every day's attack just another proof of their crimes and their intentions. They want to demoralize, destroy, and weaken Ukraine from fighting. They want Ukraine to lose and to destroy Ukraine as a country and as a nation. We want opposite. We want peace and future for Ukrainian children, for Ukrainian citizens, for the next generation. Ukraine is fighting for more than just the freedom for Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting against the tyranny. Ukraine is fighting against the terrorism. Ukraine is fighting against this pro-Putin's regime that all together combined under one wall, under one phrase, It's a Russian terrorist regime. The regime that committing crimes, committing genocide, committing ecocide, and they're disregarding any laws, any rules, and anyone and anything. They only accept the power and sharing the threat with the crimes they're committing. So we must continue our fight, and we committed to continue until needed, as long as required, for Ukraine to win this war. Героям слава! Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України! Тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Talking about our defenders, we've noticed that in the light of the other events that happening in the world, and to the Russian delight, the subject Ukraine is not on the front pages anymore. We cannot blame anyone but ourselves, because the world is very fast changing. The world never stayed the same, and we changing with this world every day. But it doesn't mean that the war in Ukraine is over. It's far from over. The war in Ukraine is continued. And this war is closer than many of us can think or can imagine. The war in Ukraine is in Europe. The war is few thousand miles away from us. This is nothing considering more modern day technology and weapon. Few thousand miles from front line. This is what's dividing us here from the Ukraine. Peace from war. And Ukraine is fighting war for survival. The Russia is fighting war for their imperialistic ambitions, for their nostalgia for the big imperialistic country that used to be USSR. And they surfing on this history. They surfing on their propaganda and their history, telling that, oh, we fought fascism, we fought this, we fought that. They became the same fascist state that they were fighting years ago during the Second World War. But I mentioned on the beginning that this didn't happen overnight. This was the systematical brainwash from their regime, from pro-Putin regime over the 2 decades, that brainwashing their citizens, their nationals against Ukraine, against the West, against the Europe, against the NATO. They blame every single one named, but not themselves, for their ruins, for their downslide, for their economical problems. They blame every single one of who's on the West, but not their own people, their own government, for their inaction or the action against their own people. And even now, they blame in West, they blame in NATO, they blame in America, they blame in Europe for sending their own citizens to fight and die in Ukraine for war, for their imperialistic ambitions, for their propaganda. And they go in there. Nonsense. They go in there and they die in there. For the amnesty, for the pay reward, for the pardoning, for the bills that's going to be annullated. And they go in there because the systematical propaganda does the job. Systematical propaganda does the job. And if the propaganda doesn't work, then they terrorizing their own people. They blackmailing their own people. They blackmailing the people who oppose the Russian regime. They imposing the heavy sentences on those who just saying little slogan for peace. And they will be sent for years and years in the Russian jails. Because they don't accept any other view other than pro-political view of the one running party, one terrorist regime that got all the connection to the pro-Putin power, to pro-Putin clan or elite of few. And that systematical brainwash lead to what we have now, to lead to this war. Because they went to Ukraine, they were told to go and kill, they were told to commit atrocity, they were told to go and destroy everything and grab what they want. And now we saw the last year when they end up with washing machines, the microwaves and the dishwashers, sending back to Russia and to the homes that they didn't even have a bloody electricity. It's absolutely stupidity, it just doesn't have a limit. But it's all about systematical propaganda that they are very strong in. They are very strong in that propaganda. And we see the result of this propaganda across the world. We see how the new elections changing the political view of the countries and parties. We see how those parties becoming in power now are more pro-Russian because they've been either to blackmail or paid to tell what Russia wants to tell through their speeches, through their political leaders, through they planting their seeds of the propaganda and they surfing on it. We must stay strong against Russian propaganda. We must stay strong against Russian terror and against the Russian aggression. Together, united, because this is a recipe for victory. If we're going to slow down, if we're gonna put Ukraine subject somewhere on the back page, we have very difficult outcome. But only fighting against the propaganda, Russian propaganda, by delivering truth what's happening in Ukraine, by delivering the messages to the world and sharing the true stories, sharing the information, to try to counter-propaganda the Russian messages, we able to withstand. I know it's a difficult task, but it's task on everyone's shoulder. This task is on our shoulders, and this task is to fight united against this terror, to fight united against the Russian regime. And this regime is already shrinking and cracking. But we have to continue this pressure. We have to continue this fight. We must not slow down our effort to support Ukraine and to continue fight against this terrorist regime. Fight shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. It doesn't matter where we are. Is it Canada, Africa, East or West? We fighting Russian terrorism. And if we stop fighting this terrorism now, they will only expand further. And this is simple as that. Because terrorism is fueled by their expansion, by their ambitions. And they will go and land grab more and more and destabilize and destroy more countries and more governments. So the terrorism must be rooted out. And Ukrainians is doing exactly what's happening. What I say is that they're rooting, they're weeding this terrorism that trying to plant and root into the east of Ukraine, into Crimea. And Ukrainian defenders need your backing, need your support, need everyone's behind them to be able to fight, to be able to win, and to push the aggressor back to where they came from. Only by total support of Ukrainian armed forces, by continuous support to Ukrainian air defense systems, by support to Ukrainian people who need it most, we are able to win this war. And I truly believe that we will win. Only together, all together, we will win.
All together, we will win. Together, we will win.
All 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 together,
We will win. All together, we will win.
we have this banner at the front here for the reason. And for those who just walking by, it's read clearly. So if you stand for freedom, you stand for Ukraine. Because Ukraine is more just a place on the map. It's more than just a country. Ukraine representing everything that the democracy is about. Ukraine is represent everything now what Europe is about. It's about the freedom, peace and democracy. And this is all combined in Ukraine against this terror. So if you stand for freedom, you stand for Ukraine. Because if Ukraine will lose, the Russia will continue and they will expand to the other countries. And this will not happen, never. For this war to stop, is Russia need to stop fighting and go home. If Russia stop fighting, this war will be over. If Russia stop fighting today, the war will be over today. If Ukraine stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. And Europe as we know it will be under big, massive question mark. And will stop existing as we know it. So by standing for Ukraine and behind Ukraine, there is a lot more on the table. There is way more than we can imagine. Thank you very much. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Glory to Ukrainian defenders!
Glory! Glory! Glory!
Thank you very much. We're going to have a short musical break. Thank you. Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Thank you. Dear friends, I just been told if you go down to the market one by one, don't make a queue. We have a tea and coffee. So our girls have been kindly brought us tea and coffee. I know it's a cold night, so for those who called, please help yourself by the market. There are girls lovely serving tea and coffee, yeah? Thank you. Again, just to remind that this rally is here 3 times a week, every week. We committed from 6 to 8 on Wednesday, Friday 6 to 8, Sundays 3 to 5. 3 times a week of your time, every week. For all this time, we've been here to remind the world about the war, to remind all the Russian atrocity, to remind the world about that war in Ukraine is not over, to remind about all the crimes that Russia committed in Ukraine. And we committed to deliver the truth, to deliver these messages, to make sure that Ukraine is not forgotten, to make sure that our fatigue is not kicking in, and we're still strong behind Ukraine. We're still strong in supporting and backing Ukraine and help Ukraine as we promised, to help Ukraine as we committed, and not to show the fatigue to the Russia, not to allow fatigue to kick in. We must only accelerate in our effort to help Ukraine, to fight with Ukraine and for Ukraine against this terror, against the terrorist Russian regime. Russia is a terrorist state.
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 But just simply to stand with Ukraine, it's not going to win this war. Unfortunately, the surprise factor when Ukraine united effort against the Russian invasion on February 24 is not longer working. When the country united against this common threat and terror in February, in March last year, it was hit Russia by surprise. They were not expecting, or they were misled that Ukraine will unite against this terror, against this brutal, terrible invasion that happened on February 24. Ukraine stood as one, truly one nation then. But now Russia is learning, is adapting. Ukraine does as well, Europe, NATO, all does as well, but Russia is adapting. And they preparing for this war every day. We have no illusions, and we should not be illusioned by that Russia is losing now. They preparing, and they already changing their factories towards the war. They changing their economy towards the war. So Ukraine does. But Russia is not defeated just yet. And they will be looking for new ways, new connections, new countries, new government, new companies to continue to supply them with a weapon, with drones, with rockets, to continue this war. As I said previously, if Ukraine will get the strong reassurances now, and Russia will receive the strong message that Ukraine is part of the European family, that Ukraine is part of the NATO family, then Russia will have no other way as to stop and withdraw, and not to have the message saying that Ukraine will possibly join the NATO when the war will be over. This war will not be over if the messages will not be strong and directed against this terrorist regime that comes from the Russian state. And the messages must be strong. We must arm Ukraine. We must provide Ukraine with what Ukraine needed, to continue to provide the weapon in what Ukraine is needed. Not tomorrow, not in fews, but in hundreds. Not 2024, but now. Arm Ukraine now!
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 Героям слава! Thank you. Ukraine need weapon. Ukraine need air defense. Ukraine need a fighter jet, tanks, more weapon to continue this fight against the brutal terrorist regime. When we asking for air defense, we don't asking for one or two to be placed in one location to defend certain town or village or the certain factory or warehouse. Ukraine must be supplied with enough air defense to withstand against these major attacks. And those attacks become more and more severe. And they come from one side, from the Russian territory. They come from the Russian territory or Russian annexed territory. But Ukraine should have enough air defense to be able to withstand those attacks. Because yet, there are many drones that still hit in Ukrainian infrastructure. The bombardment hits at targets. Targets. For Russian targets is anything and everything what's on Ukraine territory. They don't care where it's gonna land. Whether it's a school, hospital, playground, or the power plant. They don't care. They just launch the missiles and they will hit with one aim. To plant the fear, to plant the panic, and to force Ukraine to sit down and to agree on the Russian terms, I repeat, on the Russian terms, so-called peace talks. We must continue to arm Ukraine, continue to support and back Ukraine with the arm, with air defense, because this is what only Russia understands. They only understand the talk of the weapon and power. Stand with Ukraine!
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 Stand with Ukraine.
Stand with Ukraine.
Air defense for 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 Ukraine.
Air defense now.
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 Друзі, мене попросили нагадати, що, можливо, не всі зрозуміли, біля палатки дівчата принесли чай, каву, тому, будь ласка, хто ще бажає, будь ласка, підходьте до палатки, там є чай і кава. I just repeat the message again that we have a tea and coffee down by the market, so please, if you want to, just go over there and keep yourself warm. When I mentioned about the air defense, this is what Ukraine needs the most. But by simply defending, we're not going to win against a far larger army, against a far larger country, against a far larger territory. By simply defending, you can withstand the number of attacks, but you're not going to win this war. We're not going to win this war if we continue simply to defend. And that's why we're asking for the fighter jets, for arms, for the tanks, to continue and to fight and to win and push the enemy back. Ukraine has been asking for the tanks. We're receiving them. But we're receiving them is not fast enough or not enough. And this war, the brutal war, we must not forget we're fighting against larger enemy. Ukraine need more tanks. Ukraine need more fighter jets. Ukraine need more launch systems to be able to push the enemy back. Fighter jets for Ukraine.
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 Arm Ukraine now.
Arm Ukraine now.
Arm Ukraine now.
Arm Ukraine now.
Air defense for Ukraine.
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 Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Just remind everyone who joined us again today first time, which I don't think there are many, the war in Ukraine is not over. And the world must wake up. Wake up against this terror. To wake up against the Russian atrocity. To wake up against this war that Russia started in Ukraine. World must wake up and stand behind the Ukraine. World, wake up!
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 Many countries took this message to heart. Many governments took this message to heart. And they awaken and alert. They alert and they continue, they support. And they have eyes wide open. And they have a heart for Ukraine. Finland, for example, we all hear about Finland has closed the borders. They closed the borders, all the borders except one or two, against borders with Russian Federation. Finland have closed the borders on the November 22. And they said by November 28, which is war, yesterday, they will close the last border. This is 800 kilometers of the border. It's a massive territory, 800 kilometers. This is what Finland did, and closed the border because they know that uncontrolled migration from the Russia, if you're not closing the border, they will just send in more spies, propagandists, and the people into the Europe. They close the borders. I'm surprised that many other countries, they should have done it actually on the first day of invasion. They should have closed the borders as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine. But what I'm saying is the world has been sitting, waiting, and thinking, what would do Russia? They were thinking and making some assumption, what would do Russia? Why? Because Russia has got a nuclear power. Because they are second largest army in the world. Because they sit in the European Parliament, they sit in the world organizations. And they were thinking, what would do the Russian state? How long it took them to realize that they must stop thinking what Russia would do and to think for themselves what would be the best for them, for the future and for the world and for the peace, not to think what Russia would do. They did not learn from the past. And only now the world is awakening and starting to realize and start learning about the past. They start learning about the Ukraine and why Ukraine is so determined against the Russian to win this war. Because Ukrainians show their first and best example that if you start negotiating with Russia, this will only lead to more wars, and this will only lead to more blood and more territory seized by the Russia. That's happened in the past to the Russian neighbors, to the territories they annexed. Today, peacekeepers that went into the country and never came back. The Russia started many wars in the past, which they denied. But they started more than 30 wars in this century, small or large, only because everyone hesitated and everyone did nothing to stand against their aggression and their terror. Because that wasn't their business. As long as they were left alone and Russia didn't invade Europe, everyone seems to be putting a blind eye to what Russia did in the past. This time is in the past. And the time is come now for everyone to awake, for everyone to stand and back Ukraine. Because only the blind person who doesn't listen or see or want to see or hear, even in the darkest corners of the European societies, people are realizing and understand, and they can clearly see what Russian state is. Unless they have a reason to continue to speak out that Russian propaganda that we hear now from the Hungary, from now the new Slovakian government, we hear that in Europe, yes we do. But the world in general now awakened, and they clearly see the threat coming from Russia. The threat is coming from the east of the Europe, and the Russia will not stop. The Russia been stopping Ukraine thanks to the brave Ukrainian defenders, thanks to the Ukrainian people, and for our friends who help Ukraine, who continue to help Ukraine, from volunteers and ordinary people to the government. And only thanks to those, the aggression has been stopped where it is now. It doesn't mean it's contained and they will not go any further. It means that Ukraine sacrificed now 1/5 of its territory, turned into the rubble for the peace in Europe. and for the world to wake up and realize that Russia is a terrorist country who committing crimes and committing terror in the Ukraine and in the world. The price Ukraine paid is that 1/5 of Ukraine territory turned into rubble. Ukraine lost many bright and brave soldiers and ordinary people. They lost many people that yesterday had their life. Today they put their life on hold. They put their ambitions on hold. They put their dreams on hold. They stopped their career development. They stopped their own development. They put their life on the shelf. And the only what they have in common is the true love for Ukraine and fight for the future of Ukraine, for the future of their children with one dream is to win this war, come back to their homes and to give the chance, give the time for the rest of the Ukrainians, the rest of the Europe to put their powers and effort together, to put up together all the efforts towards winning this war against Russia. They give up their life for the time that we not value enough, the time that we think we all have in abandon. No, Ukraine doesn't have much time, and Ukraine and Europe doesn't have much time. And every minute, every hour, every day of delay will just make Russia stronger, and then more and more Ukrainians will lose their lives. Ukraine has lost already too many lives. Too many lives. Many people left their homes when the full-scale war started. Millions of people left their homes. Some of them will never come back because they have nowhere to come back. Because what they call the home and what they live for is no longer exist. And only what they have left is what they managed to take with them and their heart and their families. This is what Ukraine is paying with. And this is what Ukraine has paid today. Their price. Many good people lost their lives, and they still losing, Ukraine is still losing our best sons and daughters every day. Every single day. We must not forget about this. This is a time in exchange of their lives, what they give up, for the world to finally wake up against this terror, against this Russian regime. The time. I would like you just to lower the flags and have a minute of silence for our brave defenders, sons and daughters who lost their lives for this brutal war started by terrorist Russian regime. Thank you. Thank you. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Remember, Ukraine is heartbroken, but Ukraine is not broken and never will. And there's no need to prove this anymore. There's been enough proof over the last 2 years. There's been enough proofs over the last 10 years. And history proves as well that Ukraine has been defending itself from any form and appearance of the terror attacks that were coming from back then, from the communist regime, from the Stalin regime, from the now terrorist Russian regime. And Ukraine will defend itself. But just to remind, by simply defending, this war will not be won. To win this war, Ukraine must receive the help that they've been promised. Ukraine must receive the help that Ukraine has been asking for. Ukraine must receive this help not tomorrow, not in years to come, but today, now. By helping Ukraine, we helping Europe. By protecting Ukraine, we protecting Europe.
Protect peace!
Help Ukraine protect peace.
Help Ukraine protect peace!
Help Ukraine protect peace.
Help Ukraine protect peace!
Help Ukraine protect peace.
Help Ukraine protect peace!
Save Ukraine, protect Europe.
Save Ukraine, protect Europe!
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 A week ago, we were talking about importance of the keeping Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture alive. Because these are vital tools against the Russian propaganda. And we must not forget about these important subjects. This weekend, we were talking about terrible crimes committed by the Russian about the Holocaust that been now recognized by the half of the world countries. That what back then the Stalin-Lenin regime committed in Ukraine was true Holocaust. True Holocaust over Ukraine population. Holodomor. Holodomor. We all know about Holodomor. And it didn't happen just once. It happened a number of times. The Russia did put Ukraine to sleep before that, only to start the new wave of extinction and destruction with a new strong wave. That's what leads to the Holodomor. And it didn't happen once. All the Russian politics over Ukraine was about destabilizing Ukraine, destroying Ukraine history, heritage, Ukrainian nation, and to killing and demoralizing the brightest and best sons and daughters of Ukraine. Because they know that they can only exist if they have Ukraine. The Russia will not exist in the form we know it without Ukraine. And that's why they're so strong about Ukraine subject. They want Ukraine to be weaker, and they want to take all the legacy, rewrite all the past to make the new reality and the new future. Worse and worse, their nation is believed in all this converted truth. And they blindly, without asking anyone, taking, eating and living with that Russian propaganda. And this, like I said, it did not happen overnight. It's been systematical brainwash for decades. And Putin regime is standing at the front of this. and they are truly responsible for all this what currently led to it happening in Ukraine. But Russia is not alone, and they know that. And because there are few countries and governments who support them or trade with them, they still have enough power to continue this war. We don't need to name them countries, we know them already. The country that buy from Russia, the country who sell and trade with Russia, it's not one country. There are many countries who put trade and business with Russia before anything else, who put a blind eye against their crimes, Russian crimes, by just having their economies going or having the profits of fuel increasing in a larger proportion. And because of that, we must continue to tell and expose the truth and expose their crimes and tell the countries and people and government that by investing into the terrorist Russian regime, by trading with terrorist Russian regime, you automatically involved. You automatically committing crimes. You helping Russia to buy this weapon, to help the missiles, to help buy the drones that destroy and kill civilians. They destroy and kill civilians, children, women, most vulnerable people in Ukraine. Destroying Ukrainian beautiful infrastructure. Wiping Ukrainian legacy. Looting Ukrainian museums. Stealing Ukrainian grain. Ukrainian agriculture produce. Ukrainian plants and factories in the largest scale. When the Russia launched a full-scale invasion on Ukraine, they already had the trucks prepared to loot all the Ukrainian grain. This is just one example. Because, like I said, this was well planned. Thank you very much. Heroes Slava. That was planned. And they expected no resistance. And they were wrong. Ukraine has proved that they were wrong. And we're still proving that Russia is wrong. Before they even launched the full-scale war, they already lost. Because they're fighting against the free people. They're fighting against Ukrainians, against the democracy. And the people who fighting on their own territory, who knows that behind their backs are someone's daughter, son, brother. They own homes. Air defense now!
Air defense now!
Help Ukraine 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 now!
Russia is a terrorist state!
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 Russia...
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим славним захисникам і захисницям тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
I did mention that the war is only going on because there are many who still trading with Russia and putting the Russian trade before anything else. And that's what fueled the war, because any money that Russia receives, they convert it into the more missile, more drones, and more attacks over Ukraine. So by trading with Russia, it's money, it's your blood on the hands, the Ukrainian blood. Just a few facts that already been mentioned in the past. That this year, Turkey has brought the most of the Russian oil They buy approximately 100,000 barrels per day from Russia. That's 1.4 million tons last year. India continued trading with Russia. India is buying the Russian resources and they establishing factories to produce weapons. Don't forget that India is buying about 50%, up to 50% of the weapon. The biggest importer, one of the biggest importer of the Russian weapon. And plus, they put in factories up together. Don't forget about Iran who supplied the drones. Don't forget about the North Korea. It's just a list of the short countries who directly involved in this war. The war that Russia feels that they're gonna continue to fight. They continue and fighting only because they have this backing and support. Directly or indirectly, they have this backing and support of those countries and few more. When we're saying about sanctions against Russia, we shouldn't be underestimating them. And they worked to a certain extent, and they are working. But if there is a pause between the sanctions, or if there are the gaps in between the sanctions, the Russia will learn and try to cross-navigate. They adapt, and they using any gaps in the sanctions to try to continue trade, to continue business as usual. The sanctions must only increase, and they must only become stronger and stronger. Not against a few tens of individuals or tens of companies with each new sanction, but there must be total isolation of the Russian businesses from the world. The total isolation of the businesses from the global trade. Because the trade and not enough sanctions is fueling this war. So there must be total isolation of the Russian businesses from the global trade until they stop this brutal war in Ukraine, until they withdraw from Ukraine and stop fighting and go home. They need total embargo on their resources, on their gas, on their oil, on their diamond and gold, their weapon. Total embargo. Total embargo on Russia.
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 Stop trade with 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 Russia.
When the Russia withdraw from the grain deal in the summer, they thought they're going to dictate to the rest of the world that they withdraw and that's it, and the trade will be stopped. But Ukraine is committed to send the ships and grain to those who need it the most. They were committed before the war and they're still committed today. With Russian invasion it just become more and more difficult. But Ukraine commitments to help those in need when Ukraine needed help itself is unquestionable. And Ukraine continue to supply the world with the grain. through the different routes. New routes been established because Ukraine is learning, adapting, but they are, most importantly, they committed to the agreements to help the world, to help those who need it in Africa and Asia. And Ukraine is standing by these commitments. And the world must stay committed behind the Ukraine. Must stay committed as they promised in 1994 when Ukraine gave up the nuclear weapon, when the world stood and guaranteed Ukraine protection. They must go back to this guarantee and protect Ukraine by all means to win. Not just not to lose, but to win this war and to push the aggressor to where they came from. When as Ukraine committed with the grain deal, the world must be committed and guarantee Ukraine's protection. Protection against this modern threat. The threat that will not be contained only in Ukraine if it's gonna break through. The threat that comes from the one source, which is Russian Federation and the like, but this threat will expand. Because terror needs fuel and they need to expand. The terror cannot be contained by one territory. The terror needs fuel to expand and to fuel and expand their ambitions. And if they won't be contained in Ukraine, the Russia will plant the more terror and threat to the rest of the world and other countries. No one is safe until the Russia will be unable to fight this war and to continue commit the crimes and terrorize the entire world, to terrorize its neighbors, to terrorize its minorities in Russia or the European countries who border with Russia. And it's not surprise that the countries are closing the borders now. Slowly, but they're closing the borders with Russia because they seek protection. They want to be protected and ready because they alert and awaken now. And they can clearly see what comes from that side. It took a long time for the countries to awaken, too long. But the countries are awakened, and the aim is to convince the other countries who still trading with Russia, who still think that the business with Russia must be continued, to rethink and take a full control for the action, for the future of this world, for the future of and peace in this world. Because they current trade with Russian terrorist regime, their business as usual with Russia has got their consequences, severe consequences that can lead into the far greater conflict, if it's possible to imagine. They must rethink. And I'm just trying to knock, and maybe someone will hear me, who's still trading with Russian regime, to rethink and take full control and responsibility for their action, for their quick profit on the way of the uncertainty and the Russian low prices, to rethink and stop all these trades with Russian terrorist regime. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Last year, when the Russia blew up the Kakhovka Dam, everyone was saddened and awakened by the true scale of disaster that happened just overnight. And everyone was saddened and thinking about the catastrophe that happened back then. But this was short duration. The world forgot and moved on. Why? Because they're not directly involved with it. Because it's not happened over their territories. Because it's happened somewhere far away. Anything happen on our planet, what happened in Europe, will have a direct consequences. It might not happen overnight, but everything we do has got consequences for every actions or inactions. When the war in Ukraine is going on, we should not stay silent. We should not try to make a peace and sit down and talk with Russian terrorist regime, because this will only buy them time. This will only make them stronger. And this is what they want. But this isn't what the world wants. No. The world wants to have a peace restored. Ukrainians want this war to be over, as no one else. Ukrainians are fighting for this peace with their own men and women and blood. The Russia want to sit down and talk, but every single discussion they had in the past led only until they only led for them to break the agreements. They only led for them to stop for the only short moment, and then to launch the new larger scale invasion. All the discussions in the past over the last 10 years brought no peace, because Russia only wants control and the war. If they wanted the peace, they would invade Ukraine. If they wanted the peace, they would have stopped fighting a long time ago and go home. They did not stop fighting since they launched a full-scale invasion, not a single day. If the country wants a peace, they will not continue to bomb civilians, to destroy the land, and kill and murder and torture people. Don't forget how many Ukrainians has been captured and imprisoned in unhuman conditions, in terrible conditions. And I'm glad that there are lots of talks about the exchange of prisoners happening at the moment. But the sad story is that majority of the prison exchange Ukrainians are returning home on the shields. They're returning home is seriously injured, or their body brought back home on the shields. And this is the brutal reality of this war. Russia doesn't want to return Ukrainians who are pro-Ukrainian and who will be able to continue this fight. And Ukrainians are losing the best of our sons and daughters. Russia don't care. They never cared about their own people, and they care less about Ukrainians. But we do. We value every single one who defending Ukraine. And we cannot afford to lose anyone. Ukraine has already lost many sons and daughters. Brightest future of Ukraine. And they will take decades, if not centuries, to replace this generation of the Ukrainians who would have, in a peaceful time, worked towards the future, towards the making Ukraine better and brighter and more economically strong. But they choose to put their life on hold and to defend Ukraine. This is a sad truth, and that's a price that Ukraine is paying. And this is worth fighting for. Remember, Ukraine is fighting for the freedom. Ukraine is fighting for the future, for their own children. Many of Ukrainian children, I hope they will return home, because Russia, when they annexed the territories, they forced the Ukrainian children from orphanages, from their families. They've been separated and sent back to across the Russian territories. They were sent to Belarus or Russia. Many children, I just hope for their well-being. And I hope that they actually will return home and they'll be reunited with their families. What about those children who lost their parents because of this brutal invasion of the Russian terrorist state? This is a terrible loss and tragedy of the world scale for what's happening now in Ukraine. It's too great to be silent and think about this as something distant. Everything happening now in Ukraine directly will affect Europe, and is affecting now. That's why we have to continue this support to Ukraine. Help and fight for Ukraine against this terror. We must not show the fatigue and let the fatigue to kick in and let Russia to become stronger. We will continue support Ukraine, and this rally will going on. We now here every week, Wednesdays 6 to 8, Fridays 6 to 8, and Sundays 3 to 5. There might be changes in the future when we go back to the original schedule on Saturday, but that will be announced. But at the moment, we here Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. 6 short hours of our day-to-day life here, just to remind the world about the terrible crimes, about Russia committing crimes, committing terror, committing ecocide in Ukraine, committing the ecological disaster of the global scale that went way beyond the Ukraine. The Black Sea now, that borders with Turkey, Bulgaria, Hungary, the borders with Georgia, they not longer safe because of the Russian aggression and the war in Ukraine. The Black Sea used to be the paradise, and the retreat, summer retreat for many, is not safe. Ukraine is not safe. Ukraine territory, 1/5 of Ukraine, it's been infested with the bombs and landmines that will take generation to return back to the normal. That's a true scale tragedy that happened because of one country that felt power and expected inaction from the world, led by the world previous inaction and the hesitation and delay. Stop Russia, stop the war!
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 I'm going to read one poem, just the one poem, just to... that poem is in Ukrainian, so I didn't translate it to English. You just try to catch the melody of the poem, and I promise I'll translate and I'll post it later in English. But that poem is from Василь Симоненко, and it's called «Можливо, знову загримлять гармати». Василь Симоненко. Можливо, знову загримлять гармати, і танк зімне пшеницю на лану, і буде плакать і журитись мати, коли сини ітимуть на війну. І хтось востаннє поцілує милу, і хтось сльозу непрохану змахне, а може дехто втратить віру й силу, своє життя рятуючи одне. Але не я, як виснути не стану, хоч як не буде боляче мені, за нашу землю, дорогу й кохану, я рад прийняти на себе всі вогні. За тих дітей, що бігають до школи, за матерів змарнілих у труді, за рідні наші верби довгополі, за наші дні прекрасні й молоді. І тут ні сліз, ні відчаю не треба, і тут не треба страху і ниття. Живе лиш той, хто не живе для себе, хто для других виборює життя. As I said, I'll promise to translate it and post it later. This poem is about the love to Ukraine. It's about the self-sacrifice that Ukrainians are doing now, defending their sons, daughters, families. It's about the self-sacrifice for what they truly do believe. Thank you. Героям слава! That's about giving up the best of themselves for what is really matter, for what's way beyond the person or individual. And that's what motivates Ukrainians defend their homeland. Because it's far greater than simply think about themselves. That's about thinking about what this war brought on us and what the outcome and what future we have if we do little or nothing or do absolutely zero. Because as I said before, there are consequences for any actions we do and inactions that we do. And how we live with that, it's entirely up to ourselves. We should be looking for better of ourselves and find the true meaning of what this world must be and could be, and the best of ourselves to make this world a better place. Without this terror, without the crimes, without the war, without this Russian propaganda that only aim to destabilize people, minds, governments, countries, and to plant the fear, terror across the world. Thank you. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі! Слава! 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 This rally is coming to the end. Just to remind again for those who join us, we're here again this Friday and then Sunday. This rally here 6 to 8 Wednesdays, 6 to 8 Fridays and 3 to 5 on Sundays. If you have any questions, come around and ask. During the rallies you can ask and go to see our great volunteers in the market just on the left of me, who will tell you the latest information if you want to know, who will sell the merchandise. Everything they sell over there goes towards helping Ukraine and those who need it most. The volunteer organization is way more than what you can see here. It's a lot of hard work and many people involved behind the stage who doesn't come public, but they working every day, large or small, towards one goal, towards one common goal. It's a victory of Ukraine and future of Ukraine against this terror. Thank you. We're going to have a national anthem now.
Усміхнеться до Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Glory to Ukrainian defenders!
Glory! Glory! Glory!
Thank you very much.